Welcome back to Drugs and Behavior with Dr. Goodin. This is Chapter 11, Caffeine. All right. Caffeine is in coffee, caffeinated tea, chocolate, regular Coke, or Pepsi. Caffeine is a drug and a psychoactive stimulant. It can be a dependence-producing drug despite being mostly benign. Caffeine belongs to a family of stimulant compounds called xanthine. The coffee bean was first harvested in Ethiopia and its cultivation spread to Inner Arabia. Coffee has been called the wine of Islam, substituting for alcoholic beverages which are prohibited by the Quran. Coffee is as important to Arabia as tea is to China. It was popular in England in the 17th century before tea took its place as the dominant British drink. British coffee houses were a place of socialization for reputable men who were sober. Coffee helped moderate the widespread drunkenness due to the gin epidemic. Coffee was used during the settling of the American frontier. By 1860, Americans were consuming 3/4 of the world's entire production of coffee. The U.S. remains the world's top importer of coffee, followed by Germany. Coffee originates in Brazil, Colombia, and Vietnam. Most European countries do exceed the U.S. in per capita consumption, with Finland at number 1. The global coffee market is represented by 2 species of coffee bean. The original coffee bean, which is grown mostly in Brazil and Colombia, is called Coffea arabica. It was brought to South America by the French in the early 1700s. The other species, called Coffea robusta, was grown in Dutch plantations on the Indonesian island of Java. Vietnam is currently the leading power of Robusta coffee, followed by Brazil, India, and several countries in Africa. Most coffee is Arabica, 80%. Coffee blends are made up of combinations of the 2 types of beans. Robusta has a harsher taste, but twice the caffeine content, and it is cheaper. Caffeine dosages depend on the method of brewing, the amount of coffee use, brand of coffee, and brewing time. Tea is the world's oldest caffeine-containing beverage, discovered by the Chinese emperor in 2737. Tea is a root leaf from the tea plant, a large evergreen tree that is typically trimmed back to look more like a bush. Dutch traders brought tea from Asia to Western Europe in the early 1600s and were met with mixed reviews. The Germans and French both tried it but returned to beer and coffee and wine respectively. The Russians became enamored with it. Tea became the national drink of Britain. The British forced the Chinese to trade their tea in exchange for opium, imported by the British into their own country, escalating into the Opium War between China, Britain, France, and the United States. British tastes shifted from the subtle flavor of Chinese green tea leaves toward a stronger black tea that was being grown in India and Sri Lanka, which was also more economical. Today's teas are blends of black tea leaves, chiefly from India, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia, although there is a growing market for green tea from China and Japan. In colonial American times, tea was an issue, as the British government sold directly to the American colonies, bypassing American tea merchants in the process. It was viewed as a sign of British tyranny and a need for independence. Colonists boarded British vessels, opened the tea chests, and dumped the contents into the water, resulting in the Boston Tea Party. Drinking tea was viewed as unpatriotic, and coffee became the preferred beverage in the early United States. Tea consumption remains only 1/8 that of Ireland and Great Britain. 80% of all tea consumed in the U.S. is in the form of iced tea, which was introduced in St. Louis. Tea contains caffeine and theophylline. It is a strong drug, with a caffeine content approaching that of regular coffee. The bronchodilating effect of theophylline can be used in the treatment of asthma and other respiratory problems. Tea also contains polyphenols, which aid in the prevention of cardiovascular disease, inflammatory disorders, and disorders such as Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, as well as some forms of cancer. Green tea contains vitamin K, which causes the blood to clot and may interfere with blood thinning medications for the absorption of iron from the diet. Now on to your favorite, perhaps, chocolate. Chocolate comes from the pods, cocoa bean pods, growing directly on the trunk and thick main branches of the cacao trees native to Mexico and Central America. Now, they're grown in tropical regions currently of the Caribbean, South America, Africa, and Asia, and are largely exported to the U.S. and the Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Indonesia. Chocolate was believed to be a gift from an Aztec god to give humans a taste of paradise. Cortez discovered chocolate in Mexico and took cocoa beans back to Spain, where he added sugar and it became very popular. The Spanish kept chocolate and sugar a secret until the betrothal of the Spanish princess, to Louis XIII of France, where she carried with her Spanish chocolate, beginning the association of chocolate with romance. The Italian lover Casanova accredited his considerable sexual prowess to a habit of drinking chocolate every morning. Chocolate became popular in England as a beverage to be sold in coffee houses. Cocoa beans are roasted to temperatures that make the natural fat within the beans, called cocoa butter, melt, resulting in a deep-colored chocolatey smelling paste called chocolate liqueur that cools and hardens into a paste called baking chocolate, which is very bittersweet. This cocoa butter is often combined with milk, sugar, and vanilla to make milk chocolate. Chocolate does not spoil. The Hershey Company and Mars Incorporated together hold approximately 75% of the annual market of chocolate in the United States. U.S. consumes much less chocolate than other countries such as Switzerland. The xanthine content in chocolate is small. More than 95% of the caffeine in caffeinated soft drinks, moving on to soft drinks, is added by the manufacturer during production. The U.S. leads the world in per capita consumption of soft drinks. Highly caffeinated soft drinks or energy drinks have entered the market and are currently the fastest growing segment of the beverage industry. Caffeine may also be sold as a stimulant and over-the-counter drug, such as no-dose, and may be an ingredient in pain relievers, cold remedies, diuretics, or weight control aids. Caffeine may also be included in novelty products such as caffeinated lip balm, caffeinated sunflower seeds, caffeinated beer, and caffeinated soap. Even caffeinated inhalants, such as AeroShot. Caffeine is absorbed in about 30 to 60 minutes and peaks in the bloodstream in 1 hour, with reactions peaking in the central nervous system in about 2 hours. Though most coffee drinkers notice a boost of energy or buzz almost immediately. The buzz is usually due to the sugar in the coffee. Caffeine remains in the bloodstream 3 to 7 hours after it is consumed. There is a double negative effect of caffeine on the body. So stay with me while I explain this. Caffeine is a stimulant because it inhibits an inhibitory factor in brain functioning. It blocks the effects of an inhibitory neurotransmitter called adenosine, which normally binds to receptors on the surface of cells and consequently produces sleepiness, dilation of blood vessels and constriction of bronchial passageways. That's what normally happens, but caffeine stops that. It also protects the body against seizures, slows down the body's reaction to stress, and lowers heart rate, blood pressure, and body temperature. Caffeine also stops that. It blocks all of this. Because it dilates peripheral blood vessels in the brain, it may help with headaches. Caffeine excites neuronal activity in the brain, and the excitatory effect spreads downward into lower neural systems in the brain, such as the spinal cord, creating a feeling of mental alertness and a lack of fatigue. Caffeine increases vigilance and attentiveness and performance on tasks that would produce boredom, and it decreases the response time to simple visual or auditory signals. For more complex tasks that would require subjects to make decisions or in situations that require motor coordination, however, caffeine neither has little effect or can be disruptive. Caffeine lengthens the time it takes to fall asleep and reduces the quality of sleep once it comes. Caffeine does not help someone become sober. Caffeine mixed with alcohol may give people the perception that they are more in control than they actually are, possibly resulting in greater amounts of alcohol consumed. Caffeine is associated with a lower risk of developing Parkinson's disease. Other cognitive declines are stronger for women than men. Caffeine is not related to cancer, and caffeine itself has not been consistently linked to cardiovascular effects. Because caffeine induces the excretion of calcium in urine, it is associated with osteoporosis. Caffeine consumption during the first 3 months of pregnancy is related to a greater incidence of low birth weight in the newborn. High levels of caffeine consumption during pregnancy are associated with an increased risk of miscarriage. Caffeine is also cautioned during breastfeeding, as the baby does not have the enzymes to break down caffeine in the liver. Caffeine has been associated with panic attacks and increased anxiety. Over 85% of adults in the U.S. consume caffeine in one form or another each day. Caffeine does create a tolerance effect. Withdrawal from caffeine may result in headache, impaired concentration, drowsiness, irritability, muscle aches, and flu-like symptoms. Too much caffeine can produce toxic effects on the body. Extreme amounts, consumed over a short period of time, result in extreme nervousness and agitation, muscle hyperactivity, twitching, profound insomnia, heart palpitations, and arrhythmias, gastrointestinal upset, nausea, and diarrhea. The lethal dose of caffeine is somewhere between 50 and 100 cups of caffeinated coffee. Caffeinated soft drinks are a major source of caffeine for teenagers and all citizens of the U.S. Caffeine can also be easily obtained from coffee shops and bars. The physiological and behavioral effects on teens during developmental years may have a damaging effect, resulting in obesity, calcium and phosphorus deficiencies, and possible osteoporosis later on. Overall, soft drinks are associated with obesity and increased risk of type 2 diabetes. Behaviorally, caffeine may cause insomnia, nervousness, and anxiety among young people who ingest large amounts of caffeine. Moderate amounts of caffeine ingestion may reduce hyperactivity and impulsiveness associated with ADHD, much the same way as Ritalin does. I will see you guys in Chapter 12.